and welcome back to yet another exciting episode of the Lazy Money Game. In this episode, I'm going to give you a full portfolio update since I haven't updated the portfolio since the 24th of September. And at the end of the video, I'm going to give you an update on some of the rules since we are now writing 2024. So in Denmark, of course, they have updated some of the rules and some of the threshold values as well. So without further hesitation, let's dive into the numbers of the portfolio. The first thing we notice is if we go to the portfolio values tab, we see that the value of the portfolio is $260,900. And if you were curious that the number here on the front page was a little different, then it is because at the end of the year 2023, this was the value. And since I'm recording before the weekend, I don't really know what the numbers come in for the first week of 2024. So now that it is clear that we're talking about 23 numbers, let's take a look at how it actually went. So in 23, I invested a little less than $22,000. The portfolio had a gain of a little less than $37,000, meaning that I've had a net gain of a little less than $15,000, which is the equivalent of the portfolio increasing by 5.7%, which is severely lacking the S&P 500. So these are the hard facts, but what has actually produced these numbers? And one thing which is very important for me to mention here is the $22,000 which I have invested is fresh capital. And why is that important? Well, if we go to the history tab, then you can see that Activision Blizzard has been sold from my portfolio. It was due to the fact that Microsoft indeed were allowed to buy Activision Blizzard, giving me the biggest realized gain for a single stock in my portfolio with a gain of a little less than $9,500, meaning I have received $52,000 into the portfolio. So what have I invested that in? Well, let's take a look at the overview to see. So if we go back to the overview arc here and scroll all the way to the top, then I have highlighted 3 rows since there are 2 new company names, namely Canadian Pacific and Dollar General. And the reason why I've highlighted VG Properties as well is since I have increased my investment there. So I have spent almost the $52,000 which I've received from the sale of Activision Blizzard. I still have $1,500 left. So the natural question to ask in this point in time is, of course, why have I decided to invest into Canadian Pacific and Dollar General? Unfortunately, I will have to leave that as a cliffhanger since I feel it is more appropriate to actually dedicate an entire episode to each one of them at a later point in time. The only thing I can say is regarding VG, well, since I have already made my analysis of the company and I was capable of buying them at a lower price than my initial purchase, well, then it was quite an easy investment decision for me to actually invest more into them. And speaking of VG Properties, now after my latest purchase, I have invested more than $20,000 in total. They are now my biggest dividend contributor inside the portfolio. And one thing that I want to point out here is at the top here, you can see that there is an anonymous dragon lurking around inside my Google spreadsheet, meaning that even though I have had a pause of more than 3 months with producing episodes, people are still using my spreadsheet. So thank you very much. It really tells me that people want to see what it is that I'm actually doing. And if we then continue to my favorites tab, namely the dividends tab, then we can see that I have received a little more than $6,100 in 2023, meaning I'm receiving $500 more than the year before. And with the latest purchase into Canadian Pacific, Dollar General, and VG Properties, I'm expected to receive a little more than $7,000 in dividends this year. So this is what I meant almost 2 years ago when I invested into Activision Blizzard, that I was willing to wait, since receiving $9,400 in pure gains was a better investment than relying completely on the dividends. At least that was how I viewed it. So unless I see a similar transaction like Activision Blizzard this year, then I would expect my dividends to rise significantly this year. So this leads me to talk about the goals tab. So if we go to the goals tab, we can see that I have actually achieved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 goals in 2023. However, I do think that it is very unlikely that I will achieve 8 goals here in 2024 as well, since a more realistic number would be actually achieving 3 goals. So far, I'm looking very promising on the 7,000 in yearly income, since the estimates are already there. Then perhaps I will reach the $2,000 mark in quarterly, and then perhaps $8,000 in yearly. But time will have to tell. But I would be quite happy if I achieve 3 goals in 2024. And just to give a little perspective on this, even though that I in total have achieved 47 goals out of the 99, if we scroll all the way to the bottom here, then you can see that I am roughly 19% of the way. I have specifically decided my goals tab here so it becomes harder and harder to achieve the goals, just to get you motivated in the beginning, because once you are in this, it is, as Munger and Buffett saying, it is the first $100,000 which is the really hard ones. The rest comes much easier. So even though I have achieved 47 goals, I'm only 19% of the way. So this actually summarizes the portfolio update. If we then head over to my Excel spreadsheet to take a look at the rule change and the threshold values, which has changed. So let's take a look at the rule change and the threshold values. But let me start by saying, if you're not tax liable in Denmark, then you can completely skip out of this part of the video, since it is not at all relevant to you. So if we start with the rule change, First North is no longer to be considered an unregulated market. That has big tax implications. So first of all, First North is this growth exchange where you have small companies being listed there to try and raise capital. And the reason why it was considered an unregulated market was due to the fact that the politicians wanted to have an investor culture, so it should be easier to make a startup and raise capital. So you made these easier rules that you could deduct your loss not just from your capital income, but actually from your regular income. However, this has completely changed in 2024. Now it is to be considered a regulated market as well. And why have they made this change? Well, I can only guess, but maybe they have actually asked an advisor, since the performance of these First North companies haven't really been impressive, to say the least, since 33 out of 37 companies since the IPO have actually been a bad investment. So this is where you would really rely on the words of Charlie Munger and Buffett in saying, we never participate in IPOs because a company only have one reason to do an initial public offering, namely to get as much money as they can into their business. So usually there is not a bargain price to be had. But it could also, of course, be just to remove the confusion and saying, no matter where you're investing, this is a regulated market and everything should be treated the same. Hopefully, this can have the implication that investors are now actually doing investments instead of speculations, because what you have been seeing on First North is, sure, there are some moonshot which completely explodes in price, but otherwise it has been, as it always is with speculation, the majority of people will lose money. And I know that this is a complete side note, since I have no First North companies inside my portfolio, since startups don't tend to pay out a dividend, so they simply do not fit the criteria for this portfolio. If we then continue to the thresholds, then in Denmark we have this Aktiesparekonto, where you were allowed to have 106,600 kroner in 2023. That limit has now been increased to 135,900 kroner. And the reason why you perhaps want to have an Aktiesparekonto is due to the fact that it is taxed by 17% instead of 27 and 42%, which you would have regularly on a normal account. However, keep in mind that these are warehouse taxed. I believe that is the best translation of lagerbeskatning. And finally, we get to the Aldersopsparing, where they have changed the threshold for how much you are allowed to deposit within a single year, from 8,800 and up to 9,100. That is if you have more than 7 years to your official retirement age. If you are within less than 7 years, then they have changed from 56,900 and all the way up to 58,900, which you are allowed to deposit every single year. So that actually sums it up for 2023. Unfortunately, I know already by now that I won't have the time to make weekly episodes. I simply have to lower the amount of content that I can publish. But if you want to follow along, then please just have a look at the Google spreadsheet, since that will be updated on a much more frequently basis. And as always, if there are any questions or comments, then please consider leaving a comment on the video or send me an email, since I'm more than happy to try and answer your questions. And if you have enjoyed the content, then please consider leaving a like or subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out a lot. And until I see you next time, bye!